Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avagnoni.
bringing you, and dogs.
Right, and River groaning.
In playful moods this morning, apparently, or whatever.
Right.
Bringing you this week's Living Ascension. So, easy topic, or is it, right?
Right.
And it's funny that I don't think we've actually ever covered this topic before, which is surprising to me because it comes up so much, right?
Right. It does.
I mean, it comes up in context of all these other things that we talk about. And really, it's this idea that, we have created, so on the vein of what we've talked about the last several weeks, right? On living from the heart versus living from the mind, and shifting all of that because we think this and we think that. And whenever we say, we don't realize that when we say, I think you're literally saying my mind is engaged to
Right.
control this, to figure this out, to analyze this, or blah, 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 right? I think blah, 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 right?
Well, and then, that phrase, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
So that gives the mind total authority over that.
Well, and it's true because when we say I, right, we create an identity. And what's the ego? The ego is all about creating that identity and that separation and exclusion so that I can create this identity of, individuality. And so when we say, I think, therefore I am, it's like, well, that's right. My ego is what creates my identity, is basically what we're saying.
Right. Well, and saying, and I limit it to what I think.
Right. Right. So when we expand out beyond that, it changes the whole thing. So let's talk about the topic that we want to cover today. The topic has to do with how complex is your consciousness practice or your spiritual practice, or how you approach your spirituality, because the complexity of anything comes from, guess where? Not the heart.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Saying, well, what if, and you know what? It's a game to the mind, I think, right? How can I get to my end needs? How complex can I make it? And we think that's beautiful. Like, we look at that as beautiful, right? We feel like, oh, look at how beautifully complex that was. And yes, it is beautiful because we've created this extremely complex, interrelated presentation of duality, right? But when it comes down to it, we also realize, oh, there's the yawn already. We also realize we limit ourselves based on whatever complexity we impart for ourselves, right? Or require.
Right.
And so we're sort of backing into the topic because it's a very touchy subject.
It is. And I mean, I think it even touches on the current climate between what someone believes and then what science is telling them.
Right.
And it gets into that, I believe this, so it's this. And science is like, well, actually it's this. And that's, to me, that's almost like a mind versus mind, but yet the science is willing to evolve and learn and say, okay, well, that was based on what I knew then, and this is based on what I know now. And so I'm willing to change what I say. Whereas if I feel this, I believe this. So it gets into that kind of push-pull right there. And I think both of those leave out the heart.
Yeah. Okay. It just becomes a debate, right?
And it becomes my ego versus the
That
ego of a collective, maybe even.
Right.
The science community.
When we define, right? When we define, we control and we think, and that's the mind, right? And people say, well, see, that just freaks everyone out, because then they're like, well, what do you mean? That's what makes us different from the apes and from the blah, 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 for the other animals is, the way we think. And it's like, right. But we've also been the animals. Like, we're also the animals and all the other things, the plants and the fauna and everything else. as well as the presentation of this humanoid, embodiment that thinks in an identity of separation and exclusion, and comparatives, right? And complexity,
Right.
right? And when
Hierarchy.
and look at right, and look at how we judge when we see somebody who lives a simple life. We sort of judge that,
Right, which I think we touched on that last week, talking about, choices and about how some people can't or choose not to invest themselves in the complexities of what we consider a normal life.
right?
And that's not wrong.
Yeah, and we so the touchy subject. Good morning, Yasmin. Yeah, and the touchy part of this is when we hit upon spirituality, right? Beliefs, whether you call it religion, spirituality, magic, intentional creation,
Right.
whatever, energy healing, anything that we've defined, right? In those definitions, we get caught up in, well, if you are this, if you decide to define yourself as this, then you have to do this way, right?
Yes.
And you
Yes,
have
because
to,
that supports that definition.
right? And so that means, to access God or the divine or universe, you have to go through another individual. You have to go through a certain ritual. You have to stand on your head on a full moon, and chant this thing 3 times and have 5 crystals in this order and this, whatever. And so I'm not poking fun at it as much as just poking attention to it to say it is as complex or as simple as we choose for it to be. However,
Right.
in this reality of complexity that we've created, right, this duality, we have created a hierarchy on the more complex it is, the more important it must be.
And the more powerful.
And the more powerful, right?
Right.
And then we've chosen to believe that. And when we choose to believe that, we create that reality, right?
Yes.
And so we want incantations and light codes and light language and, spells and rituals and ceremonies and, services and like all these things.
Right.
That we commit ourselves.
And we can even add in things like the cycles of the planets and the full moon, the new moon, anything associated with anything external. And astrology. It all factors into that, giving structure to something or the term that comes to me is rigidity. That
because that's what we give it. Yeah, we give it rigidity instead of saying I am consciously allowing this to create a structure for me, right?
Right.
And I know that it is my it's my voluntary engagement, right? That allows me to utilize it, right? We sort of claim victimhood to it, to say I can only access this energy doing this, right? And so many, God, I've been taught, you and I both have had many certifications and many different kinds of like, say, energy healing practices and whatever. And it's like, and everyone has its own, you've got to do this way, you've got to do this, and you've got to be attuned to this particular frequency, and you've got to utilize these symbols, or you've got to utilize these actions, or this incantation, or this
hand
positions, or opening this space this way, and holding this space this way. And so it's funny because, that's part of when Trinity came into me. It was, well, like, it's wiping all that slate, not to give that, like, the shameless promotion, but it was like wiping the slate of all of that is creating limitation, like in some way, shape, or form. And yes, it only, and what I have actually said for a long time, that in my understanding before even Trinity, was utilize anything that allows you to expand in your consciousness until it stops helping you expand and it starts to limit you.
Right. And then move on.
Right. To something else.
Move beyond.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so what's interesting to talk about the Trinity thing is my guidance with that had been to, it is really just opening ourselves up to allow ourselves past all of those limitations, all of those, control mechanisms, to simply the simplicity of divine creation and the energy that we hold that allows that to happen. And how simple or complex it is up to us. And the biggest thing that people would have had the hardest time with in this practice has been how simple it is and how powerful it is in its simplicity. And they just have the hard time in their mind saying, how can this be that powerful when it's so simple? I didn't have to go and do whatever for 6 weeks. I didn't do a cleanse and this and this and this and this to get to that power.
Well, and I think that sometimes the hardest part is breaking the habits.
Yes.
Because they become so buried and so unconscious that it's automatic, and you don't realize, and there are different levels of it, and you get deeper the more you practice, and the more you let go, and the more you are in acceptance of just what's in the present moment, which gets back to the presence, the more you bump up against those hidden habits. And it's a question of identifying them and coming to the realization that you found that it's easier to just give your power to that than to sit with the possibility of it being different.
Right. Right. And we do that with life. We do that with, we're talking about spiritual practices and all that kind of stuff, but we do that with everything in life. And that's been for me, and even doing this practice and letting Trinity evolve, it's all been about myself, right? And how complex I've thought things had to be. And then, oh no, it doesn't. It can be this simple. Oh no, but it can be even simpler. Oh, it can be even simpler than that. And then when that starts translating to everything else in your life, right? And you realize, oh, why am I doing this way? It's adding all of this complexity, right? And it's all because we believe the mind, the ego says, I have to do this. I can't do this. I mustn't do this. These are the complexities we create in the control mechanism of the mind and ego and living from the mind, right?
Well, and terms like, well, that's the only option. Another limiting word is that only. Well, that's the only solution I see. Or that's the only thing I know to do.
That's impossible.
Oh yeah.
That's a big one.
Right. And I know that I at times have created circumstances to where, whether it was feeling physically to the point, almost paralysis of I just don't know what to do, to force me into that place of all I can think about is the next 5 minutes. And how do I want to feel in those next 5 minutes? And if I can connect to that feeling of this is overwhelming joy, or this is overwhelming, oh my gosh, yes, this is it. And connect into that in those 5 minutes, that gets me to the next 5 minutes, which then gets me to the next 15 minutes.
Right.
And then I sit there and I want to say to myself, well, why do you have to create such suffering to make yourself do this? And it's like, that's when you sit back and lose that self-harm and self-judgment and say, but look at what I've done. Look at these last 15 minutes. Look at these last 30 minutes. And you literally just build on those individual moments, that now.
Yeah.
To get you to a bigger, more joyful now.
Right. And a place to even start beyond that is, before that is when people say that, I don't know, right? The thing is, we do know, we just don't want to look at the other options usually, right? I don't know what to do. And that's because in some level, we're controlling ourselves by saying, I will only allow these options to be my reality, to be my path, because these other options are either too uncomfortable, too, outrageous, too whatever beliefs that we have around them, right? So a good question to ask yourself or each other or whatever, because I've done this in so many sessions, is when somebody says, I don't know, I say, well, what if you did know? If you did know, what would the options be?
Right.
And that jars the mind out of control, right? Because I was like, well, wait, what do you mean? What if I did know? Well, of course I could know because because I'm the mind and I can. And then all of a sudden you start opening up new paths of possibility, right? And so that's like a starting place, right? And then I think what you're talking about is like another level of that is the feeling place and the presence place. But the first thing to do, I think, is to unlock the mind and saying no, because whenever we say I have to, or I don't know, or I can't do this, or I can only do this way, or yeah, I just don't know how to do this. If we said, okay, but what if I allowed, but what if I could, right? What if I
Well,
did?
right. And the term that comes to mind when you say that is the mind trap. And when you say external input,
Mhm.
and in this case, we're primarily talking about from the heart.
Yes. So,
I mean, this pulls together so many things that we've already talked about. I mean, even that endpoint creation of looking at, I want to create this feeling. Now, heart and mind work together to provide me with the activities that create that.
Mhm.
And just keep that in
That
mind.
vision, that
That
vision.
vision, right? That endpoint, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so there's a lot of, I mean, and this one has a lot to unpack, like as you say, right? It's like there's a lot to unpack with that, because like I can't tell you how many times it's like, okay, and we're really conscious about this, right? And yet still all the time I'm like, well, I was just thinking I had to do this way. Why did I think I had to do this way? Like, well,
Right.
or I didn't see that right in front. How many times we don't see something right in front of our faces because we're thinking in all these other directions instead of being present with what's here in front of us right now.
Well, we're looking but not seeing.
Right. So
Because I know that I always, whenever I go away and am in a hotel for several days, I come home and I see things that I haven't seen before, because I've taken myself out of my environment, and I come back and it's like, oh wow, yeah, there is a lot of clutter on my kitchen counters. Because in a hotel there's nothing.
I know.
And then you come home, so we're conditioned to only see things that haven't been there before, and if something's been there for a while, you just don't see it anymore.
Yes. And so we get lost in these complexities, right? It's like, and sometimes that's what I always laugh about. Sometimes people just come to have sessions with me, like just so I can see their things that they're not looking at right in front of them. And that's like not even vision work. That's just, well, what if you allowed yourself this?
Right.
Oh, I never thought about that. Right. Because we're so stuck in those patterns. So how do we do that? Stepping out of all that into presence is one huge way.
Right.
Another one is, I always talk about sort of the mantra of, excuse me, because even when we say creation through words, right? I create through my words, the abracadabra thing. I create what I say.
Right.
Which is what that means in Aramaic for anybody who doesn't know that. Or it's like I create as I speak.
Yes.
We gave the power of the word a lot of power. Well, we gave the word a lot of power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we still use that complexity, right, in creation here, and thinking that it has to be that way, but we don't. Honestly, some of the most powerful creations I've ever made were things that I felt to create before I ever thought of the words to create them.
Yes.
And
What works best for me is to connect to the feeling I want to feel.
mhm, yeah.
And then trust that I have the knowledge and the wherewithal to get myself from where I am to that place of feeling that way, and allow whatever comes in, whatever activities, whatever, falling apart, crumbling, to make space for that feeling.
Mhm. Yeah. And allowing is a big thing. Is I always, I started saying the mantra that I always say when I start with intentional creation is, and I open my heart to allow all possibilities to manifest this, right?
Right.
When I open my heart, maybe I should add, and my mind.
Right.
Oh, I like that. That actually feels good.
Right.
To all possibility, to allow for all possibilities. And when I've actually allowed that, there have been so many times things have created that I'm like, I would have never thought of that creation. And it so attended to all of those feelings that I would like that I had desired to create.
Right.
So, that's, oh, I like that. Yeah. I open my heart and my mind to all possibilities. I think that's a good one to add into my things. That's new. That's going to be added into all of them, because we do give ourselves a lot of power in the word, right?
We
In
do.
our words. And so thing number one in the talking about this complexity and simplicity is really, I had this vision years ago of being before creation, or in the void of creation, the void of possibility. And the first time I ever had that experience, it was so incredibly powerful to just create attention to something, create intention from nothing. And it's not even a thought. It's simply it is, right? It is
Mm-hmm.
there. I'm just thought to create it. I just felt to create that. And that is the most powerful feeling of creation. And when we allow that, but the problem is the thinking, always the thinking. It's always the mind, not the problem, but the challenge is because the mind always says, well, I have to maintain this. I have to have this kind of life. I have to have this. I have to continue doing this kind of work. I have to continue living in this kind of house. I have to continue. And those are all of the requirements that the mind says I have to create this within this picture frame. And if it doesn't fit in that picture frame, that means it's impossible.
Right. Right. Well, or the but.
Mhm.
Anytime the but shows up.
That's right. This you go make my butt look big, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
This is
So
but make my ego look big.
I know, that's what I was thinking. Should that be turned around?
Right.
Yeah. So this is another really big one, a really core one, but it's, and like we wanted to talk about a little bit about the spiritual stuff because we all get stuck in that sometimes.
Right. Well, I think for me, coming back to that place of simplicity, when I bring the presence back in, and I don't want to say force myself, but rehabituate myself to the simplicity of things, I see so much more and I feel so much more, and it makes my creations so much more intentional, to where the end result is closer to what I truly desire, versus like, oh, well, that's just more of the same. And that's not really what I want.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that it becomes more authentic creation that way.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I feel that my thoughts and feelings about myself become so much richer, that it just becomes more perpetual of getting more of what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's nothing but coming back to that simplicity. of knowing that I have access to everything in the universe and that it's all right here. It's a question of, I don't know. It's sometimes you hear more by being quiet.
Well, yeah, I always hear more by being quiet.
Right.
The thing is, we still compartmentalize that, like, so we can say that when we're meditating, okay. But then we go on to with life and we go busy, 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 right? And we idealize busyness as an equality to importance, right? So we think that when things are simple, that they're unimportant. We think they're not powerful, right?
Right.
Because
Well, which
that goes
turns
back,
around to, it's not what you think.
right?
You
But
know, we have the whole academy on it's not what you think.
right, exactly. The whole Wonderland, or shameless plug for the week. The
Right.
But examples to this are, I mean, there's like endless numbers of examples to this in our everyday lives. I mean, how many times have you said, okay, here's something really simple and really literal, like you're driving someplace. I'm going to this particular whatever place, a store that I don't typically go to very often, and I'm going to go this way. I'm going to take these roads. And traffic builds up or becomes really, stuck, like somehow like there's construction or there's a blockage, there's an accident, you can't get there that way. And then you start going, oh my God, I got it, like, oh, I'm going to sit here and I must. So do you sit there and wait? Right. Which could
Right.
be an endless amount of time. Or do you just say, okay, well, I'll just go another way. Or
Right.
I'll turn around and go home and go another time. Or you have,
right.
or I go to another store that has the same thing that's right here that I could just like go a lot more simply, and a lot more simply. I mean, and it's always adding the ors on instead of the buts.
Yes.
Or what I say, the and. Yeah, and I could do this, and I could do that, and I could do this too, instead of but, because but tries to control it down and expands it out. So that's something we do all the time, right? When we say, I want to do this way, like think of how many fights happen in households with couples and stuff on one has to do it this way and one has to do it that way. And there's the endless debate on who is right and who is wrong, instead of how do we just get this done in the most efficient way possible, right? Or created. These are perfect examples of all these complexities, right? We talk about, our obsession culturally with busyness on how we equate that with how important somebody is how busy they are, right? And how people say, in terms of trying to compliment somebody, oh, well, I know how busy you are.
Right.
Right. And it's funny because when people say that to me, I always laugh and say, well, the days are full. But that's a very different, to me, it's a very different thing to say that things are full versus they're busy. Because to me, busy is just filling up space and complexity, adding complexity to say I have more complexity, right?
Right. Yeah, my days can be completely full and I do nothing.
Yeah. So, but then, and then we go, okay, well, I'm not unimportant because I'm not busy enough, or I'm not doing enough, or I'm not creating enough this way in this fashion, or I have to, like how many people, okay, here's another example. How many women have children and they believe that they have to still be what culture dictates you to be as a mother, right? And then they decide they really would like to go back to work, even though they've been home with the kids or whatever. I've had many clients come in with that, right? And they go, but I've got to do this, and then I can do this, and then they go back to work, and then they're still doing everything and going to work, and they're exhausted, and nothing else has changed, because in their minds, no, I have to keep this complexity, and I have to add this because that's my job, right? Instead of, how do I do this more simply? How do I let go?
Right. Well, and then there's the flip side of that, of these women who have that strong desire to stop that corporate life, that work life, and that imbalance, and enjoy their children and invest in that. And then the judgment of, you know, that's not, they're not supporting the family. They're not supporting the household financially. And the guilt of, oh, well, I should have gone back to work, and I should be doing these things. Anytime you say I should,
Right.
whether it's, you know, going back to work or staying home, or I should do this for a job, or I should do this for a job. Anytime you do that.
Well, or I should do this as a spouse, or I shouldn't do this as a spouse, or I should, you know, like as a parent. Oh, I should do this. I should give up. I should sacrifice everything I want to be a parent.
Right.
Because that would make me seem to
Or
be,
I should be a parent.
yeah,
That's
I should-
another big one.
right.
Yeah. Choosing not to have children.
Which is still funny. It's still, and it's funny how we've had such a huge influx of adults who are choosing not to have kids. And culturally, we have not even close to caught up to that, right? Because there's still this whole, you know, I was on the phone with someone last week who was like all about, oh, well, you know, I have grandchild number 8 coming and da da da, like, and it's like, blah, blah, blah. And well, when are you going to start? And it's like, I probably won't, because I don't think my kids are going to have kids. And I don't have any problem with that, because that's what makes them happy. That's what makes them happy.
Exactly.
And I told my kids, if you don't feel like having kids, don't have kids.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I told
Never
mine the
do
same
it.
thing.
Don't ever get married because you think it's the next thing to do because everybody's telling us we should. Don't ever have kids because you think it's the next thing to do because everybody's telling you should. So many people in our society still do that, right? And we add those complexities. Those are all these complexities that to make you a valuable person, this is what you have to do, right?
Right. Right.
And when we stop with that, to make me this, all right, so then when we come back to the basic simplicity of consciousness, it is, I already am the divine. I'm already everything. There's nothing I'm not.
Right.
I might
I
pretend
mean,
I am.
that's as simple as it gets.
And it's nothing that I don't have. It's only things I've forgotten, and I'm remembering how to allow them into my reality. How much simpler is that?
Right. And, you know, just to get back to what you said earlier about using the rituals and using those to reconnect you to things, and then allowing that to fall away, or allowing that to grow, or allowing that to like a flower to blossom, to open. If that's the purpose of it, this isn't a criticism of that. It is simply a don't allow it to be another limiting factor.
Right. And like I've said, use it to help you expand until it limits you.
Exactly. And then allow more.
And then you allow something else to, and you know, I learned early on, it's like, there are many things that have great ideas of understanding and expansion that are out there. Right. But then a lot of times then the mind has to build complexity around it to make it more important or more legitimate or whatever. Right. And so that's when it starts to limit that idea. So it's like, if you just say, okay, this remembrance here, if I pull this nugget, I call them golden nuggets. I pull this golden nugget here, and that works. And that feels really good to me for where I am. And I can utilize that in my expansion. And then I can pull this golden nugget over here and this golden nugget over here, and look at all of these golden nuggets that I have, because I'm allowing all of it, instead of just saying, oh, nope, I have to stay here. And that's the point. The point is we get stuck in that. That's the mind, right? And that's like, so we say it in the spiritual context, it has to do with our jobs, our career, our marriages, our lifestyle, our homes, the way we live, what we do. Like, we get into that whole book, the little book of, I have to do this because I've always done it this way, or this is what I always wanted, or this is what I always planned, instead of saying, well, is this what I still want? Is this what still works for me? Is this
Right.
still where I am today? Because it might not be. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about changing, because we are evolving as we go, in terms of, instead of, I like saying, like we're saying, instead of like saying we're getting more, it's, we're just letting go of more limitations to be more of what we can possibly be. And that's going to change us.
Right. Right. More of what we already are.
Yes.
We're just
Wow.
unaware.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's the more we get to simplicity about it, the more we allow simplicity in everything that we do, right? And that's the going with the flow. That's being in the flow, right? Being in the heart, being consciousness, being in connection, being in guidance. All the stuff we have talked about incessantly for years
Right.
now, right?
Right.
It's really come down to, that's what this is. It's how simple can we make it for ourselves? When we allow flow, it just, and it's funny because I was away this weekend and my husband and I were hiking, and we had a perfect example of, although it ended up being both examples were great, is like, well, we were looking for a particular path to a waterfall, very unmarked. And we had directions and we thought we were going the right way, right? But then it was like, no, it's got to be this way, right? It's got to be this way.
Right.
Which we never found it the first that we went 2 days in a row. The first day we never found what we were originally looking for. However, at some point we just started laughing about it, because we're like, obviously the fairies are hiding the signposts, right?
Right.
And we're like, so we were not supposed to find that today. We were supposed to find these other nice, beautiful little, and we found some other beautiful little spots, little mini waterfalls and other parts up the creek that were beautiful and serene and secluded. And we just sat and had lunch and, enjoyed being there. Right. And then the second day we went back, and it was funny how all of a sudden we could see and they weren't like big signs. Literally, they were little spray painted red dots on some trees to find
Well,
the way. But I was like, obviously the fairies were hiding those yesterday, because it seemed so simple the second day. And the second day we were so much more in the, all right, well,
we're open to all possibilities here.
we're open to all the possibilities here, right? I'm going to look up more, right? And now we did this side of the trail and we know that's not the way. So
Right.
let's try a different way. And so that's where we get, and I was laughing on the first day. I was laughing because I'm like, I do this in like Mount Shasta all the time. Like I'm always like, oh, because there's so many different hiking trails that are so like unmarked out in Western, the Western United States. And I'm like, and the key is getting into the place of feeling and connecting with the mind and the feel of, is this the way to go? Right. Because it might not be what the mind thinks you're doing, because it's always perfect.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's all like that kind of stuff for us to consciously step out. And that's the simplicity of like, this is what we're talking about, getting back to simplicity, is when we get to that presence and we can step back and separate and say, okay, what is there for me now?
Right.
When you simply say that to yourself without saying, I have to do this, and you're saying, well, what is there for me now? Not what should I do? What shouldn't I do? Then you realize that perfection every moment. Well, that's when we step out of the complexities, right? And we allow, like what you're saying, that 5 minutes, right?
Yes.
And the 15 minutes and the hour and whatever. But the basic steps are, it's time for us to step out of we are lost in our minds. We're lost in the complexity of the thoughts.
Right. Right.
And that's when people say, oh, I can never meditate because I can never shut the mind down. Well, the reason for meditating is to see that within yourself, right? To see the chatter, so that then you can step back from it and then say, okay, but what is there now? Like, what do I feel? And let's connect that with the mind in functioning here, right? That's that connection of both.
And all with compassion, that self-compassion and that self-understanding and that unconditional selfness of I'm here for myself.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's the baby step. That's, I think, what we set for today, right? Opening your heart to all possibility, allowing that
And your
presence
mind.
and your mind. I was gonna say, adding that mind in, open your mind to all possibility too. And letting the heart lead that open to possibility.
Right. Right.
Which then creates that flow and that presence
All with
to,
self-support
yes,
and
self-support.
compassion.
Yeah. And yeah, the acceptance, the gratitude, that's all that forgiveness course that we did, the cycle of
That's
forgiveness.
right.
So it's really sitting in this place of seeing ourselves in a much different light, and knowing too, let's set our intention to allow ourselves all that we just said, but also give ourselves the space. I allow myself the space of the power of simplicity, the power
yeah.
of simplicity,
Right.
and embracing that. Oh, that feels really good. That feels yummy. So, all right, everyone. So you know what we do. Let's sit back, get comfortable, take a deep breath as we close our eyes. We open our heart, we step out of separation back in wholeness and oneness, and we hold ourselves at the vibration where that is our truth. That is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. That was like a breath of fresh air. But
Right.
I kept on seeing all of these things that were like all these details and all of these, complexities, whatever. And it was like I saw a big hand like smudge it, like watercolors, like finger paints or whatever. And they are just all smudged together. And it was like, oh, and at first it was like the like, like, oh, I lost all my information. Right. And then it was like, oh no, but see how the picture starts to come together. And I was like, oh, look at how beautiful that is. And it was like, oh. And then it just kept expanding. That just felt beautiful.
Yeah, I think of it as I felt when you set down you put down something heavy, and then you go to pick it back up, and it's 10 times heavier than you remembered it. And that's the way this felt, is like letting go of that overthinking and the over mind, and then dipping your toe back in it, and your body goes, oh no.
Nope, nope, too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was way harder than I remember it being.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So everybody sit in that this week. Tell us
Right.
we want to hear what you discover about yourself that you've been thinking, so complex, and things that you were able to see from a different light, and, put it in the comments below, or, send
Right.
us a PM on,
Absolutely.
we love hearing.
And
And
again, as always, if you know someone who could benefit from this, please share and follow us
yep,
and like us.
yep. And help spread the word.
Right.
Yep. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully this helps to simplify your week.
Right. Right.
Literally. Have a great one. We will see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
signing off with this week's Living Ascension. Have a great one.